What's up YouTube, Capital G here, doing a video response to Glasgow Yugioh's video response. There's something weird happened. He uploaded the video yesterday. I had no involvement in that video coming down. People were like, oh my god, Caps, he's a copyright strike. And I had no idea he was going to take his video down. It was corrupted and he ended up re-uploading it. I don't know whether he edited it and re-uploaded it or whatever. I didn't watch it again because I had already watched it once. And this is just my 2 cents on what he's talking about, just from a different perspective. You guys listen to both sides and then you form your own opinions, or maybe you have your own opinions, so you could just post that below. Now, by the way, we don't have any beef or anything. I talked to Glasgow Yugioh, even though I had no idea he was going to make a video response to my video, because I had no idea that he even watched my videos. And even if he doesn't, he apparently watched that one. I talked to him and a couple of his friends on Skype for about an hour and a half. So if you guys were in his stream, then you saw that discussion and you saw the different opinions. And that's really just what this is. It's a conversation and you're hearing both sides of the opinions. And I'm going to be talking about performances and pals, Pepe, it being hit, was that fair a week later, having cooler heads prevail on that topic. And then we're going to be talking about Powercreep. That's the main focus, because that is... I don't really understand how he took my video and really turned it into a discussion about Powercreep when my video had nothing to do with Powercreep. My video more or less was just, I was sick of people complaining about their deck being hit because they had invested too. Let me just go into the first topic. And again, I don't have any problems with Glasgow Yugioh. Very nice guy. Talked to him yesterday. Maybe we'll have some collaborations for more discussions on Skype, etc., etc. All right, first off, 1 week later, almost exactly, performances and pals getting hit in the TCG after, let's just say, 3 weeks. Was it fair? In my opinion, yes, it was still fair. Now, I keep hearing all the performance and pals, all of these performances and pals players, the Pepe players, saying it wasn't fair because of the time frame. My thing is it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. Now people keep saying, well, Konami has trained us that, we're going to play these broken decks for 6 months and then hit them and then play another. Like, that is all irrelevant. Every single person who played this deck all admitted it was broken. Everybody with eyes can see that when a deck takes 29 out of 32 spots, even though I feel like those results are kind of jaded, because I feel like people, there were probably some people who may have played Cosmos or Monarchs, but they were like, fuck it. If I'm going to play Pepe now, because I don't get another chance of playing this deck the way it's currently constructed at Atlantis. I feel like the results, there were more people that were going to play this deck instead. But let's just go on the results as they were. No excuses. Like, it's a legitimate problem when a deck takes 29 out of 32 spots at a YCS. That is like some Teledad level shit. Okay, so if we're already all on board with the idea that this deck was clearly a problem and it needed to be dealt with, then why does it matter if Konami waits 6 months or 6 days? Like, they're doing the right thing in the end. And I feel like everybody keeps on saying, well, everybody's so mad at the new adjusted ban list. Everybody, like, the only people who, that is so exaggerated, the only people who hate it are the people who legitimately invested in this deck. Okay, well, I mean, like I said, it's just your loss. I'm sick of people trying to assert this idea that it's somehow unfair because Necros, or because Dragon Rulers, or because Prophecy or Teledad all got more time to essentially dominate and wreck up the format. Those decks were legitimate problems. Konami eventually dealt with them, but I don't understand how, like, it's almost like the government passing a bill that they know should have been in existence. Like, if they pass it quickly, when in the past they've shown that they would have throttled their feet and done nothing about it and ignored the issue, like, how can you condemn them for passing it more quickly? Like, in the end, Konami did the right thing. All of the talk about, losing money and it not having them, like, that is all irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, they did the right thing for the health of the game. That is, honestly, that's all that matters as the bottom line, period, point blank. And again, the only players who are really frustrated, like, you guys have to understand, the Pepe players, you are the serious minority. Yes, your deck was dominating on the competitive level, but if you just looked at all Yu-Gi-Oh players, like, you're so the minority. Ask anybody else who didn't play this deck, are they happy about the new adjusted ban list? They will give you a resounding yes. That's why I kept saying get over yourselves, because I'm saying get over yourselves like you don't speak for the community. You think that you do because the competitive numbers show that you're dominating, but you're actually a very small minority. And that's why I was so aggressive in saying, look, you guys don't represent the bulk of the majority. Stop talking like you do. Stop trying to say that it's not fair because Dragon Rulers, Necros, XYZ deck, got to live longer dominating as a degenerative piece of crap deck. Just because you didn't get that doesn't mean that they didn't do the right thing in the end. Now let's talk about Powercreep, because everybody seems to have this idea that if Powercreep was just removed out of the game, everything would be sunshine and rainbows, and it would be like, let's just perfect. And that if you're not saying that taking out Powercreep out of the game immediately and forever is basically saying that you're conforming with a bad idea that Konami has implanted into our brains, and that, he went into way too deep of a social issue about like slavery and all this other shit that I was just like, okay, let's just keep it in the context of a children's card game. But okay, you have to look at the ramifications of your actions. For starters, yes, I do. Like, I don't like the fact that the power creep is so high in the game right now. I don't like the fact that you have a deck like Magispectors that, I mean, the entire archetype can't be targeted and is essentially immune to destruction effects, and it's not even that good of a deck. I mean, it's not even a top 5 deck. But if you would have told me that Konami would build an entire archetype like that in 2012, like during Teledad format, well, excuse me, that was earlier, but during 2012, that was like Zalish, I would have lost my mind. I'd have been like, no way in hell. They probably have to ban that entire archetype. And it's like, that archetype can't even keep up with things like, Cosmos and things like, the Performer Pals, because it's just not strong enough. But the thing is, let's just look at if Konami said, okay, we are not going to release any more archetypes in the future that are stronger than the archetypes now. Essentially, that would be removing power creep out of the game. Okay, I'm sure that most of you guys know a decent amount of competitive players that are, and don't feel offended by this if this is you. I'm not trying to categorize you or anything like that. Don't feel offended, because I'm not saying that I'm better than you because I don't conform like this. But I'm sure you guys know a lot of competitive players that are essentially just mindless sheep. They just jump from whatever is perceived to be the best deck at the time to the next best deck at the time. They don't really care about the deck's lore. They don't really care how the deck operates. They don't care about the artwork or anything interesting, even the mechanics. They just say, this deck gives me the best chance to play at a tournament and to place well, so I'm going to play it. I don't really care about anything else. It's all like all the other arbitrary pieces. It's all irrelevant. Whatever gives me the best chance to win, I'll play. I mean, that guy who, when Duelist Alliance came out, he played Shadows, and then he just, Fire Lake's out, I'm gonna play Burning Abyss. Oh wait, Necroz is OP, I'm gonna play Necroz. Oh my god, have you seen those Pendulum Performer Power Magicians? I'm gonna play that. Oh man, Bosch comes out, full power Pepe, let's go. Like somebody who literally just jumps from deck to deck to deck to deck to deck, just playing the best deck. The problem with that is a player like that who cares nothing other than just playing the best deck. What would be the incentive for them to buy any new cards from a new booster set if those cards were not stronger than the cards that were released now? Like, there would be zero incentive. To put it into perspective, like, if they would have taken Power Creep out of the game before Duelist Alliance, why would CapG have ever stopped playing Boojins? Like, I'm not even good at this game, and I got first on this website, duelingnetwork.com, where, people who top 8 YCSs like Alpay Ingen play on this site regularly. If I was #1 on this site with Boojins, do you ever think that I would have stopped playing that deck if Konami had not power creeped it? Like, no, I would have been playing that deck today. Same thing with Sertella Knights. I legitimately got emotionally invested in Sertella Knights. I liked the way they looked. I liked the way the deck played. I liked everything about it. Had Teller Knights, and some people will argue about this, had they not kind of been power creeped, there's no way that I would have stopped playing. I don't like Monarchs that much. I just play them because they're kind of good and they're pretty much a simple helmet deck that I can play. But if Sertella Knights were still as good as they were in Duelist Alliance era, like, I would have never stopped playing the deck. So it's like Konami would have these new archetypes coming out, and there'd be essentially no reason to buy them other than the lore, the artwork, and the mechanics. But it's like, how many people are going to invest in those just because of those elements? Like, if people are not going to invest in the archetypes because they're actually good, I just don't think that there'd be, like, it's going to be difficult to buy new product. And some people might say, well, Cap, they do it in Magic and they do it in Pokemon. The reason that they can do it in Magic the Gathering is because they have set rotation. So like, the new sets don't have to be more powerful than the old sets because they do set rotation. So it's like, there's no need for power creep in a game like Magic the Gathering. And furthermore, I went to Magic's website. Magic the Gathering has set rotation and they still have a fucking ban list. So I know people like to make these arguments about why does the ban list exist? If Konami stopped making broken cards, there wouldn't be a need for the ban list. Like, if a game that doesn't even have to have power creep still has a ban list, then it clearly shows you that it's something that's going to happen. Let's talk about Konami's R&D. Because there seems to be this onus, like every time a card is broken, we immediately jump on the R&D team and say, well, didn't they test this? Or we immediately jump on Konami and say, well, didn't they test this? Like, do you guys remember just like a short month ago where people wanted Naturia Beast banned, and I made a video saying that it was ridiculous that people wanted it banned because it just so happened that after like 6 years of this card never seeing play ever, that people decided, wow, you know what? This card's searchable by King of the Pharaoh Imps, and where's it at? We already play King of the Pharaoh Imp, so if we summon Hat Tricker, we can easily make this unlock our opponent out of playing, a Pendulum Mirror match via Naturia Beast. And people took this as, oh man, Naturia Beast too broken. You set it up turn 1, your opponent can't play Yu-Gi-Oh, let's ban it. Like, how on earth could someone look at Konami's R&D and say it's your fault that Naturia Beast is now broken 6 years after you released the card when you've released, I don't know, maybe 2,000-3,000 cards since then? Like, how can you blame Konami for that? Like, there are going to be cards that Konami releases, and yes, R&D does test the cards. I assume that they do something that is a semblance to what we believe their job is. But like, there are certain times where you can look at a card and you're like, okay, R&D knew that card was broken and they pushed it through anyway. Like, a prime example is Cleafort Towers. Like, they may have thought that it wasn't the easiest thing to summon, but considering it's searchable, they should have known that. Cleafort would have been a perfectly great deck even without that card. They would have been a perfectly strong deck. I don't understand why they needed to make essentially an unkillable monster that also took cards out of your opponent's hand, that also reduced the attack of special summon. They made the motherfucker literally unkillable. You either tribute summon it or you have Honest, and if you don't have that Diamond Crab King outside of that, it's just fucking pretty damn impossible to kill. But there are also examples of cards that they come out and it's very subjective, and it's like, if the player base can't even decide if it's broken, and I'm sure that there's probably 10,000 of us to every one of them, then like, how do you expect them to decide if it's broken? I asked Nahir, like, point blank, and the people that were in the Skype call, is Luster Pendulum broken? And nobody could give me a definitive answer. But I don't think anybody, like, if you ask the general Yu-Gi-Oh community, are you happy Luster Pendulum is at 1? Everybody would pretty much say yes. So it's like, if we can, as the players, even identify that Luster Pendulum was broken, and yes, we knew about Plushfire, like, everybody knew about, if you would have asked me, is Plushfire enough to make this card broken, I'd have probably been like, nah, I don't think it'll be broken. But like, if you look at it now, most people say that, you know, it maybe not broken, but it deserves its place on the list. So it's like, if we can't even come to agreement on some of these cards, then it's like, how do you expect R&D? Like, I don't give R&D this amount of credit acting like they're geniuses and shit like that. I think that they're just dudes doing a job. I don't think that they're competitive players. That's why I feel like a lot of people give the research and development team way too much credit. Like, we think that they're these guys who are really smart, and nah, dude, whoa, rip. I'm sorry, the video cut off, but let's go back to talking about R&D. The reason I don't give R&D that much credit is because they're not as smart as the players. Like, these guys don't have the same passion. I don't think that they love this game. I think that it's just a job for them. That's why I don't give R&D a lot of credit when a card like Luster Pendulum comes out, or a card like Plushfire comes out. Like, yeah, it definitely should have been once per turn, but I looked at Plushfire, I didn't immediately think, okay, this card's absolutely broken. And then you looked at, you know, some of the combos was between Wavering Eyes, Master Pendulum, and Luster Pendulum. Was like, okay, yeah, it definitely was a card that needed to be limited or banned. But I didn't immediately identify this as a broken card because I guess just my intellect isn't that high. Now, we came to an agreement that we do think that there are things that always fall between the cracks. You know what I mean? This is where the ban list definitely needs to step in. There's always going to be cards that just, they have unforeseen effects on the ban list. Like if you look at things like the Substitute being released, like who on earth could have imagined that Substitute, which was probably designed to just be a frog support card so that you could bring out other frog cards faster, would end up leading to, you know, the frog FTK, or who would ever believe that the Gishki cards that they would release, that there would somehow be like a Gishki FTK deck out. Like those, that's the players essentially sitting in a room for 15 hours and then saying, Eureka, I broke Yu-Gi-Oh! You know what I mean? Like you can't blame that on Konami, clearly. But I also look at Power Creep and like this is a seriously deep conversation, so if I'm sorry if this video is very long, but it's like in addition to removing Power Creep out and, you know, the ramifications that it would have on the game's potential sales, I guess that's all irrelevant, because if you're just looking for a healthy game, it really shouldn't matter, I guess, if the game is selling well. Even though if the game isn't selling well, then it could be in jeopardy of not existing anymore. If you also took Power Creep out of the game, if Konami said tomorrow, no more Power Creep, decks are not going to be more powerful than the decks today, you do essentially realize that there would be this violent cycle of, okay, Konami, obviously Performa Pow's best deck, we need to neuter them. Okay, well, Cosmos, shit, Dark Destroyer is the most powerful card in the game because the cards that you are releasing now, you've already said are not going to be more powerful than Dark Destroyer. Okay, we need to neuter Cosmos. Okay, so let's go, and everybody's going to start playing Monarchs. Oh shit, Erebus, best monster in the game, you need to neuter Monarchs. It's like, it would be this violent cycle of, there would still be a best deck. Like everything that Konami has released since they started doing Power Creep, which is essentially during Phantom Darkness, they would essentially have to neuter all of that shit, which is why, you know, he said that yes, it would be essentially like pressing a restart button on Yu-Gi-Oh, which means, okay, so let's just say you wiped out everything through Phantom Darkness. Essentially, you just say you took all the decent ban archetypes. You'd essentially have to ban all their cards. I mean, something like Wolfbark, that's a one card XC that doesn't even, that's once per turn actually. You can actually just keep monster reborning monsters with Wolfbark every single turn. Like you would essentially have to just ban out the last, I don't know, 6-7 years of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And I mean, would you really want to play a game like that? Like that would be so unheard of in any type of card game. You know, I look at this idea that it's so easy of a fix, that there is such an easy way to fix competitive balance. But if you look at anything that's ever been played competitively, why on earth do you think that there are tiers in everything? Whether it's card games, you know, Magic, they've got tiers, Pokemon, same thing. Whether it's Call of Duty with the guns or League of Legends with the champions, whether it's the NFL where every team gets to spend the same amount of money and yet every single year the Cleveland Browns are garbage. You know what I mean? The NBA, whether it's professional sports, video games, card games, why are there tiers in every single thing? Because it doesn't really matter how many rules you implement into anything that's competitive. There will always be some level of imbalance, because as long as there are differences, it will create some type of advantage. Like we talked about, you know, if they would have done that, if they just deleted all the last 8 years of Yu-Gi-Oh and started releasing new decks that are all supposed to be on the same level, eventually, as long as some different, like as long as some different mechanics came out, they're like, some decks would have advantages over, you know, the new decks. Or what it would do is just these new decks would be good, but what about the players from, you know, the GX era who say, dude, why are my Cloudians still weak and your new deck is like still broken? Like, I don't think that there would ever be competitive balance. Like, it sounds really good on paper, but can you design, I don't know, 1,000 cards a year that are all going to be perfectly balanced? Like, absolutely not. Yeah, I'm not saying that Konami doesn't release certain cards knowing full well that they're going to be broken, because, like, especially in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, like, why the fuck did you even design Fiber Jar? That's one of the dumbest cards ever. Why did you design Spellbook of Judgment? That's stupid. Like, why, you thought it was fair? You thought it was even feasible that or practical for somebody to get a spell card for every spell card that you activated? Like, that's just dumb. But there are a lot of cards that are just kind of subjective. I also think that Power creep is also necessary because I think that there are certain mechanics that are just inherently not as good as other mechanics. And that's been the way, like, it's been that way since like the beginning of time. I'm not even talking about like, you know, fusion summon isn't as good as pendulum. That's obvious. With pendulum, they fucked up on that mechanic. The way that they could have made pendulum balance is when pendulum cards are destroyed, they should have went to the graveyard. That would have perfectly fixed it, because then you still would have been able to pendulum 5 from your hand. So you still get that, like, you still get the high ceiling of the pendulum summon. You have to invest 2 cards, pendulum summon 5 from your hand, wreck your opponent. Like, that still would be cool. But then if I fairy wind your scales, you wouldn't be able to pendulum them back. So it's like the risk would be proportional to the reward, in my opinion. But like, we went on this discussion about traps and how one of the players that was in our Skype lobby was talking about how traps just suck, that they're not good. They don't work with combo oriented decks, like a deck like this, Performances and Powers, where everything is kind of like a combo piece. This card works with everything that's level 4. This card works with everything that's a scale. It has bonus stackage with, you know, things like Plush Fire. Draco Face Off works with these cards. And it's like, you know, traps don't work with combo decks because they're not combo pieces. They're slow because you have to set them. They only deal with one situation. Hence, like, Torrential Tribute is a fantastic card, but if your opponent goes YOLO and says, I got Cyber Infinity, Rafflesia, and Ignister, your Torrential doesn't do anything. They're not searchable. So I was like, okay, if traps, we are now basically agreeing that traps just aren't as good as they were. Like, what is the solution? Because I personally agree. I feel like traps have to cover so much ground now to just even be viable that they didn't have to. I mean, look at cards like Ring of Destruction and Evac. No one fucking plays them anymore because there are things that can't be targeted now, and those cards, like, you can't afford to use one card on one monster when your opponent can pendulum summon 5 monsters. Like, you have to have things like Bottomless and Solemn Warning that can deal with multiple summons and multiple threats in one card. And I mean, Bottomless for the most part is mainly seeing play because, like, it's technically searchable and can be used from the deck with Rafflesia. So like, that gives it bonus utility, and a card like Solemn Warning covers a lot of ground. So it's like, if the only thing, if you still want traps to be viable, because I feel like if traps are largely not viable, I mean, that's definitely not a good thing. But I felt like the only way to fix that problem is to essentially power creep traps, is to release a card like Solemn Strike that handles everything, a card that can handle mass pendulum summoning, a card that can be used on any monster effect, a card that kind of does it all, because a trap has to incorporate, like, a trap has to be more responsible. It has to cover more ground than it did before. Hence, you know, Ring of Destruction and Evac not being playable. So it's like, if we're fine with traps being power creeped, then why are we like why is it so unfair that monster archetypes be power creep but traps can be power creep? Like, I'm not understanding that logic. And I asked Nazir himself, I said, or not here, I asked him himself, I'm like, dude, so okay, if you're finding it to be a problem that traps are essentially useless now, you know, what is the solution to that problem? And I think he either said he doesn't know, but I said, okay, well, we should power creep traps. We should make traps more powerful to catch up to monsters and spells. And it's like, all right, well, clearly power creep is good for something. I also look at other mechanics such as the ritual summon and the fusion summon. And this is why I never blame Konami for making Necros. Everybody looks at Necros and like, oh, those were so terrible in the game, they're a cancer. But you have to look at it like that. Like, the way that I looked at Necros was, the ritual summon has been around since the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! I believe that there were rituals in Magic Ruler. That's the 3rd Yu-Gi-Oh! Set, like something crab. There was Hungry Burger and like some crab or some shit like that. Oh, there was Relinquish also. Rituals have never ever been like a tier 1 deck. They just haven't, not consistently. And it's because the mechanic just was not going to, like, the mechanic itself was flawed. The fact that you have to use a spell card and you have to pay the cost of that spell card, you have to use another monster to summon one monster. You're essentially investing 3 cards for one summon. And what happens if that summon gets bottomless? Okay, you just wasted 3 cards. Your opponent used 1 card to counter yours. Okay, rest in pepperonis, you lose. The same thing with the fusion summon. You're essentially doing the same thing. You're using 3 cards to summon 1 monster. Okay, if that monster gets bottomless, you basically just lose. So it's like, the only way that those were ever going to be playable mechanics is for Konami to make them more efficient. And people could argue, he argued with Necros, well, they shouldn't have given them hand effects and they shouldn't have given them this, that, and the third and made it so that they can recruit their spells. But the thing is, they tried to make them fair. Do people not realize Konami Konami tried to semi-adjust rituals and fusions to Powercreep. They were in the dual terminal. They were called Gishkis and Gem Knights. They made Gem Knights so that you could get back your fusion spell over and over again. They made Gishki so that you could get back your ritual spell. They tried to make it more cost efficient. What happened? Nobody played those fucking decks because they still weren't as good as Xyz. They still weren't as good as Synchro, but largely Xyz. Like, they still weren't as good as the Xyz mechanic because it still wasn't economical enough. And then they adjusted them to Powercreep harder. And that's when Necros came out and it was like, wow, these motherfuckers are bonkers. But it's like Konami had to go that far just to get rituals to be playable. Because if they would have just done, you know, essentially Gishki 2.0, like, why the fuck would anybody have just played Ritual? Like, no one's gonna play Rituals just to play Rituals. I mean, we found that out with Gishkis. They were a Ritual deck that, you know, was supposed to be good, and there hadn't been any Ritual decks in a long time. But people aren't going to play Ritual and Fusion decks just because of nostalgia. Like, that's been proven. Who the fuck played Sophera? Who the fuck played Herald of Perfection other than, like, Alinthio? People are not going to play these mechanics just because they're new, or just because we haven't seen them in a while. So it's like, if Konami's not putting forth a ton of effort into making this shit catch up to the meta, like, they're not going to be played. And I get it. It's just one violent cycle after another. Like, it's like power creep in, power creep out. It's just a huge violent cycle. Simo was talking about the way Yu-Gi-Oh should be is everything should be fair or everything should be broken. At this point, we're closer to everything being broken than everything being fair. Like, I kind of understood his point. We are, like, in the middle, and it's really sucky that something like Tribe Infecting Virus is on the ban list, but then, you know, we've got shit like Elder Entity Norden still running around, which, I mean, I think that card is, like, way fucking better than Tribe Infecting Virus. But, like, removing all of the power creep out of the game has such huge ramifications. And when I ask anybody, you know, what's the better solution, they don't really have an answer. But then they look at Konami and they're just like, you fucked it up, so fix it. And it's like, the fix isn't that easy. If you look at every other competitive game, they all have problems. They all have tiers. There is no balance. So I don't understand why you expect Yu-Gi-Oh to be any different. You know, Pokemon has set rotation too, and that's the reason that they probably don't have crazy power creep. But if you, like, even Magic the Gathering, less power creep than Yu-Gi-Oh, still has a ban list, man. Like, I just don't think that the solution it's not as easy as saying take all power creep out of the game, because everything that was adjusted to power creep instantly becomes broken. And even if the cards would have to be designed so fucking flawlessly by, like, some genius machine robot to make sure that the balance was perfect along every single card that you release. And you have to remember, Konami releases 4 booster packs a year in addition to starter decks and structure decks. They give us, what, 3 structure/starter decks a year, in addition to, you know, sometimes we get promos, in addition to sometimes we get mini packs like High Speed Riders and the Secret Forces. Like, they're releasing essentially, let's just say 1,000 cards. Well, maybe not 1,000. Let's just say they're releasing 700 cards a year. Like, you release 700 cards a year and make sure every single one of them is balanced and perfect. And even if you don't catch something, which should be what the ban list is for, you still need to make sure that every single one of your archetypes is perfectly balanced with each other so that somebody doesn't cry foul. Because, you know, if X deck becomes better than Y deck, then, you know, everybody's going to point at fucking X deck and say, this deck is so broken it needs to be banned. I don't think that power creep is a good thing. I just think that at this point it's a necessary evil. Like, the game has snowballed so far out of control that, like, it just is the way that it is. Like, it doesn't, there's no way that there is an easy fix. What Konami needs to do, in my personal opinion, and it's not gonna fix it all at once, is start diminishing power creep slowly. Not do it all at once, because the ramifications are way too huge. They need to start trickling back. You know, don't make entire archetypes that can't be targeted. Don't make an entire archetype that has Snatch Steal built into it like Grados. And again, these archetypes aren't even that good. But that's just my 2 cents, guys. You let me know where you fall in on this conversation, because again, I think it's way easier to talk about there being competitive balance and saying that there's an easy fix to it. Okay, well, if there's an easy fix, then why hasn't Magic found it? Why hasn't Pokemon found it? Why hasn't the NFL found it? Why hasn't Super Smash Brothers? Why hasn't Call of Duty found it? Why hasn't every competitive thing ever outside of like chess and poker, where, you know, those games don't have archetypes and don't have essentially differences? Why hasn't anything been it? Why hasn't League of Legends found it? Why hasn't any other entity that's competitive, why haven't they found it? Unless that the people who don't agree, unless you're just like smarter than all of these people. I mean, that could be a possibility too. Maybe Glasgow is just, maybe he's smarter than all of the people who made all of those games. You guys let me know. I'm sorry this video was so long. Thank you for watching as always. Oh, and one last thing, guys, that I just wanted to touch on, because I don't think I talked about it in the video earlier, was about fairness and how I believe that is such a subjective term. Because now here's saying that he wants to essentially, he wants to have Konami just print quote unquote fair cards, the game just to be fair, to be a fair card game. And let's just say that we did his plan of taking out all power creep, no more power creep in the game, and essentially we would have to nuke everything from today to Phantom Darkness, where, in my personal opinion, that's where power creep was just, it kind of went through the roof and just, it started cycling and going up as a roller coaster, just up and up and up and up and up. So let's say that we nuked everything from Phantom Darkness till today. But like, my problem is with that is, what's stopping the players from the early GX days? Some, you know, players out there who fucking might say, oh man, I'm getting back into Yu-Gi-Oh! They're getting rid of all those broken cards. You know, now I can play my roids. And I'm not talking about speed roids, guys. I'm talking about like the old school Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, like Cyroids that, you know, like Cyrus used to play on the TV show, like, you know, Cyroids and Cloudians and stuff. Like, what's stopping them from looking at whatever the newest booster pack is that's going to release? You know, it's going to like restart the game with their 4 new archetypes or whatever. What's stopping them from looking at that deck or those archetypes and saying, man, you get access to this, that, and like, your deck's so broken? I know you guys might be like, well, those are the minority, like that doesn't matter. But the point is, like, it's still a level of unfairness. Like, I don't understand why you'd want to do this half measure, why you'd want to completely overhaul the game, do something so impractical that it's never been done in any card game ever, and would probably just be the death of Yu-Gi-Oh! To still have a significant amount of unfairness to all the cards that essentially weren't nuked out of the game. You know what I mean? Like, those players are still going to be at a serious disadvantage in comparison to the newer decks. So it's like, you know, it's, if you're saying that that's fine, then you're basically admitting that you're fine with a level of fairness as long as it complies to your satisfaction. To the players who want to play, you know, an old school Blue Eyes White Dragon deck, or to a player who wants to play, you know, Dark Scorpion Burglars or some shit like that, those really old school, super terrible archetype, you're saying that, you know, their level of fairness is essentially irrelevant as long as your level of fairness is met. I don't understand why you would do such a huge overhaul to still just have a level of unfairness still in the game. Like, the only solution that would actually work is to literally nuke everything that has ever been printed in Yu-Gi-Oh! And start completely from scratch. That way you could somehow find a way for every deck and every archetype to be printed with a unilateral and just a perfect streamlined level of power, which I still think is completely I still think it's completely impossible, but that would be the only way to have quote unquote fairness, like a straight up fairness across the board, because, you know, what's fair to him might not be fair to somebody else. And to say that what's fair to somebody else doesn't matter is just, that's bullshit. Like, now you're just saying that your level of fairness is all that matters, which is completely horseshit. So, sorry that I just wanted to add this on. Thank you guys for watching as always. Last point, I swear. I personally think that what Glasgow Yu-Gi-Oh! Is talking about it's so unachievable, even from a business, like from just a fundamental business standpoint that everybody can agree on. They reach this quote-unquote fairness of having to delete essentially every card Konami has ever printed and start anew, because, again, removing power creep out of the game doesn't do anything unless you're going to do a full measure, because, again, essentially all you're doing is make Cosmo the best deck, then you have to reckon on the ban list, then Monarch becomes the best deck, then you have to reckon on the ban list. Again, you're doing power creep, you're just going backwards instead of forwards. Essentially, if you did delete every card that Konami, you know, was going to had already printed essentially and started anew, where everything was somehow some, you know, equal level of fairness, like, the more practical idea is to actually do what Simo was talking about, where instead of us being in this middle ground where everything's not broken and everything's not fair. Just make everything broken. I'm just saying from a practical standpoint, it's much easier to take like 80 cards off of the ban list and the limited list and just make them unlimited than to move fucking 7,000 cards onto the ban list. Like, it actually makes more sense for, oh, you think your 4-power Pepe is like the best deck ever? Okay, well, have fun going against, you know, fucking windups when they have 3 tour guides and 3 duality and 3 Mighty. Like, see how fun it is when your fucking hand gets looped and you lose all 5 cards in your hand. You know, see how powerful, or see how fun it is when you have to play against Dino Rabbit with, you know, fucking 3 solemn notices, 3 solemn warnings, 3 solemn judgments, and 3 fucking, you know, like a fucking Doka turn 1. Like, are you kidding? You know, see how powerful your Pepe is when you have to deal with, you know, turn 1 Infernity with, like, you know, 100 Ice Dragon and 3 barriers and a fucking Archfiend and a break, and you know what I mean? Like, basically, you'd have every single deck. You'd have Chaos Dragons with 3 Future Fusions and 3 Gateway Samurais, and like, it would be every deck would essentially have a power level of 9,000 rather than every deck having a power level of 0 and us having essentially no cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm just saying neither one of these are basically going to happen. I'm just saying from a practical standpoint, like, that would be more practical than essentially deleting every card ever. Because again, just removing power creep out of the game doesn't do anything. It just makes power creep essentially go backwards as far as what the best deck is and what needs to get hit.